see my first slide? Okay.
Not yet, no.
So, okay, so something went wrong. Like this? It's okay?
Yes, perfect. We can see it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So some of us maybe didn't like math when you were in school. Some had difficulties in the math class. Some were anxious when they had to do math or take a math test. And is it dyscalculia, all of these type of situation? Is dyscalculia a rare phenomenon? What are the causes of dyscalculia? What can we do about it? These are the topics that I will cover during this presentation. So according to the DSM-5, dyscalculia covers difficulties learning number-related concepts or using the symbols and function to perform math calculations. So it can be difficulties in what we call number sense, like really knowing the meaning of numbers, maybe being able to see a relationship between numbers, detecting one that is smaller than another one, for instance, memorizing math facts, like knowing that 3 times 6 is 18, doing math calculation, doing math reasoning, solving math word problems. These are all kind of basic number knowledge that can be difficult for people with dyscalculia. But all math learning disabilities are not dyscalculia. To be dyscalculic, you first have to have very important difficulties that are objectivized by a standardized test. These difficulties should appear during school age and interfere with the academic performance of the person. But of course, it will last and provoke also difficulties in adulthood, in the profession, in the budget management, and so on. These difficulties should be there for at least 6 months, despite the provision of specific intervention. So if a child is learning math normally, but now when the concept of fraction is introduced and the child does not understand this concept, I mean, if it's just a very recent difficulty, you are not sure that it's dyscalculia. Then you have also to show that these difficulties are not due to other causes like brain damage or diseases, neurogenetic disorder, premature birth, visual or hearing impairment, intellectual disabilities, or psychoeducational stimulation. So you have to see in the anamnesis that the difficulties are not related to other causes. Some studies have assessed the prevalence of dyscalculia, and I will just mention 2 of them. One was held in Belgium with 3rd and 4th grade children, about 4,000 children. And the criteria that were used in that study was firstly to show that arithmetic performance of the children were at least 2 standard deviations below the norm, so very low performance. Second, that performance was lower than expected on basis of general school result or intelligence. So you have to have a child that is normally intelligent, and there is really a discrepancy between the result in math and the result in terms of intelligence, normal reasoning, and so on. And third, that these children were not responsive to remediation at school. And with these 3 criteria, the SUT find out that 7.7% of the 3rd grade children met those criteria and 6.6% in 4th grade. So this is not a few children, it's quite a certain amount of children who are presenting those difficulties. And the same prevalence of dyscalculia was also observed in Israel in the study of Gross Tour, also with about 3,000 children of 10 years old, and the criteria there were a little bit different. She used mainly two criteria. The first one was that math score should be more than 2 years late. So these 10 years old children were performing below typical 8 years old children in the math test. And the second criteria was that they had to have a normal IQ above 80. And with this criteria, she found out that 6.5% of the children met those criteria. And in this study of Gross-Tour that I just mentioned, so the children were 10 years old, and she followed them up to 6 years after. And when she retested 6 years after the children who were diagnosed as having those difficulties in math, half of them were still performing very weakly in math. They had a performance below percentile 5 in a math test, and nearly all of them, 95% of them, were performing in the lower quarter of a math test. So either they were very, very poor or poor, but nearly none of them were really in the normal range. She also found out that there were some family aggregates. So she went to see the families of 31 of these children who had dyscalculia, and again 3 years after were still dyscalculic, performing very low in a math test. And she could test 149 family members, so brothers, sisters, parents. And she used three criteria for detecting math learning difficulties in the family. The first one is that on a math performance test, people should score below the percentile 25. Second, that the IQ should be normal, above 85. And third, they should be a significant discrepancy between math scores and IQ. So at least a significant difference of one standard deviation between the two. So people should be performing in math lower than expected according to their intelligence. And with those criteria, she found out that 67% of the mother were performing really badly in math and respected the three criteria, 41% of the father, and 53% of the siblings. So overall, about half of the family members also had difficulties in math, so which is about 10 times more than the general population. So there is really a family context, and it's also important to acknowledge that, because maybe the parent who should help the child to do the homework, it might not be always, sometimes it's better for the mother, sometimes it's better for the father. It's important to realize that maybe some of the parents have had also math learning difficulties. And another interesting study, another study of prevalence was held by Barbaresi. They tested more than 5,000 children, and they measured the difference between the intelligence of the children and the math scores. And they used a different formula, very strict formula or more loose formula. And globally, they found out that according to the formula they used, they detected 5.9 up to 13.8% of the children who corresponded to those criteria. But what is important is that no matter the criteria, about 50% of the children were not detected at school. So many of the children who struggle in math are not detected at school, and there is still an underdiagnosis of dyscalculia. And I've been working on dyscalculia since more than 20 years now. And when I go see friends, meet people, and when I talk about my work, usually people don't know about dyscalculia. They say, oh, it's a problem with reading. And no, it's not a problem with reading. And so dyslexia now is really well known, but dyscalculia is still really under-recognized. And so that's why it is so important to have a special day and conferences like the one that is organized today. There is also a ratio of girls and boys, which is basically equal. So although there is a stereotype according to which girls would perform more badly than boys in math, actually in terms of dyscalculia, there is no difference in prevalence. What is also important is that there are comorbidities. It's not specific to dyscalculia. I mean, in all neurodevelopmental disorder, there are large comorbidities. And the bigger comorbidity with dyscalculia is dyslexia, because about half of the dyscalculic children are poor readers, and the other way around, about half of the poor readers are dyscalculic. So if you are working with dyslexic children, be careful, because probably half of them are having problems with math as well. There is also some comorbidity with ADHD, but the situation is less clear. There are two studies, the one with Grotstour, Silva as well, and de Soot, who used questionnaires that they gave to parents to see whether parents complained about their children's hyperactivity or attention skills. And they found in two studies that 25% of the children with dyscalculia were reported by their parents as having attentional or hyperactivity problems. And in the Soot, the number was higher because it was 42%. But I mean, these are result of questionnaire filled in by the parents. It's not a clinical diagnosis. And besides all these numbers, I think it's very important to recognize the suffering of these people. I like to mention this interview that was published in the book of Brian Butterworth about an adult with different children who had difficulties in math. And so he asked them, how do the children feel in math class when they lose the thread? And the first child is saying, it's horrible. Another one said, you feel stupid. When I don't know something, I'd like to be clever and I blame myself. I want to cry and I want to be at home with mom and I don't want to have to do any more math. So we can really feel the suffering of the child. And I mean, you cannot avoid math. You have to learn that. It's not something that, like, I'm not good in basketball, but I don't need to play basketball. In adults also, there are still suffering related to math learning disabilities or dyscalculia. A first woman said, I've never been good with numbers, but being articulate and an excellent reader, it was dismissed as me being lazy or disruptive. I was feeling stupid, angry, miserable, and very, very alone. A lot of people with dyscalculia, at least adults with dyscalculia, complain about the fact that they have been treated as being stupid. And dyscalculia is not stupidity. When you test those people and test their math performance and their intelligence, and you say you have a normal intelligence, but you are dyscalculic, it's really a relief. It completely changed the life of the person to know that I was dyscalculic is very different from I'm stupid. And another one, a woman, a 26 years old woman, she said, when I was in secondary 2, which means about grade 7, they agreed to let me pass on condition that I never studied math. I couldn't calculate what the cashier gave me back, so I never dared to do a student job. I don't manage my budget very well, or I have to write everything down. So even when you have finished your math class, there are still difficulties in daily life. Another problem that can be related to dyscalculia, but not every time, is what is called math anxiety. These are the quotes of a woman that I recently met. I diagnosed her as a dyscalculic person, and she had an IQ of 140. So it was really extremely interesting to meet this woman. But she had a very strong math anxiety. When I'm faced with a calculation, I liquefy. I break out in a cold sweat. Then I have panic attacks, paralyzing anxiety. My intellectual capacity collapses. I don't understand anything anymore. Everything gets mixed up, and I fall into a nervous breakdown that exhausts me for several hours. I can't do my tax return. I have enormous difficulty understanding the advice of my banker on my pension fund. Here you can really feel this anxiety that is there when she has to deal with numbers or with calculation. It has been shown in research that children with developmental dyscalculia have more math anxiety than typical children. In the Devin study, it has been shown that they are twice as likely to have high math anxiety, but it's not always the case. Like Devin also showed that 77% of children with high math anxiety had typical or high mathematic performance. So it's important to make the distinction between dyscalculia and math anxiety. You can be good in math and have math anxiety. You can be really poor in math and have no math anxiety. In children, the main consequences are the impact on school performance, of course, but also the impact on the affective domain, possibly higher math anxiety, possibly lower self-esteem. In adulthood, lower performance in numerical daily activities are seen as regards time, measure, general semantic numerical knowledge, like knowing dates and things like that, and problems with money. It has also been shown that they have lower range of working opportunities, lower salaries, poorer financial well-being, and less access to internet technology. So what are the causes of dyscalculia? Currently, I would say that there are two main types of causes that are examined in the research. The first one relates to what we call general cognitive factors. So cognitive skills that are used for learning math, but also for other activities. One of the first factors of that type that is considered is working memory. The working memory is your ability to hold and process information in short-term memory. Typically, it is measured, for instance, I give you a sequence of Arabic digits, and I ask you to give me back all these digits, starting from the last one up to the first one, so in the reverse order. Or I could also ask you to give me those digits, but ranked by order, from the smaller to the bigger one. So you have to hold this information in memory and process this information in memory. It has been shown that if you have a low working memory, it will impede your learning process already in preschool. like we have shown that learning the number words, 3, hundreds, 14, is more difficult for children, 4, 5 years old children who are having poor short-term memory, poor working memory. Then learning these number words in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's also a challenge for them. And then also the level, what is called the elaboration of that counting list. So for instance, counting from a number different than 1, counting from 3, or counting from 3 up to 7. This also is more difficult for them. And of course, these are first steps to do calculation and may lead to do addition, for instance. We have also shown that if you have a weak working memory, then you have less mature strategies to solve simple addition. We tested first grade children, so like you will use counting all. So for instance, to solve 4 plus 5, you will start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then count all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is a very immature strategy. And also you usually produce more errors in solving addition, and you use more often your fingers to count because you need to have an external support to track where you are in the counting. Later on, for all the children, we will see that if you have weak working memory, you have difficulties in mental calculation, because of course, when you have to do mental calculation, you have to hold the intermediate result and so on. You have also difficulties with problem solving because you have to figure out the situation that is described in the problem and to see how it can be translated into a math formula. And so it has been shown quite strongly that if you have weak working memory, you will have difficulties learning in math. But this general cognitive factor also leads to other difficulties in other learning, like also learning to read is also impacted by a weak working memory. So probably if you have difficulties in that area, it could explain comorbidities. Another type of general cognitive factor that has been considered is the hypersensitivity to interference in memory. It's a work that we did with Alice de Fischer. And what is it? An hypersensitivity to interference in memory. We know that our memory is associative, so it creates links between the information that we have in memory. And if you have this hypersensitivity to interference in memory, then the traces of the different information you have in memory get confused, especially if they are very similar. And this leads to a quite specific difficulties in learning the arithmetical facts. So like 6 times 4 equals 24. So imagine that you have to memorize 4 sentences. Louis and Pierre live in the street Émile Jean. Pierre and Jacques live in the street Louis Denis. Jean and Jacques live in the street Émile Pierre. Denis and Jean live in the street Louis Denis. You will see that it's very difficult to memorize all this information. Why? Because Louis appears in different places. Jean appears in different places. Pierre as well. If I ask you to memorize 36 sentences like that, you will become crazy and you will be really mad. But if I replace Émile by 1, Louis by 2, Jacques by 3, Denis by 4, Jean by 6, Pierre by 8, then I have the problems that you can see here, 2 times 8 equals 16 and so on. So when you have to learn arithmetical facts, you have to make association between problems like 8 times 3 and solution like 24. But all these problems have common traits, which are the digits, And the solution also have common traits. So if you have if you are not too much sensitive to interference in memory, you can make really nice link between a problem and the solution. But if you are hypersensitive to interference in memory, then all these things become very messed up. And then when a problem is presented, you don't know the answer because many things gets activated in your brain. Another type of research is to consider that number learning, math learning is like a castle of cards with different things that we have to learn and that built upon the previous learning. And so people have tried to think what is the most basic number skills on which all the other are built and which could possibly be deficient in dyscalculia, in people with dyscalculia. So many basic numerical tasks have been proposed to children with dyscalculia and have shown difficulties, like reciting the counting sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7-year-old children with dyscalculia are slower. Enumerating sets. You have a set, you have to count the dots. And it has been shown that dyscalculic are slower in that task, and also that they have a weaker understanding of the underlying principle of enumeration. It has also been shown that just reading and writing Arabic numbers, they are producing more errors. Another process is called subitizing. If I show you these dots, and I ask you how many dots are they, you don't need to count 1, 2, 3, 4. Directly, you can see that there are 4. For some people, they can see that quickly that there are 5 dots or even 6 dots. But for other, when 6 dots are presented, they have to count them. So it's called the subitizing range. And several studies have shown that people with dyscalculia have a smaller subitizing range, so that they have more quickly to turn into counting the elements. There have been also many studies showing simply 2 Arabic digits, like 2 and 7, and asking the child to show where is the bigger number. And usually their children with dyscalculia are slower and less accurate in this very basic task. Another task that has been used is a task where you have a line with numbers on each extremities and a number that you have to position on the line. And in this task, children with dyscalculia have also been shown to be less precise. And also, of course, in simple arithmetic, even the simple 1-digit arithmetic, like 3 plus 4, it has been shown that people with dyscalculia are producing more errors, they are slower, and they use less mature strategies to find a solution. There have been also studies with adults, and again, in this very basic task, when we measure the time, for instance, we can see that people with dyscalculia still are underperforming in comparison with control, with typical adults. They have a smaller subitizing range. When they are asked to compare 2 Arabic digits, like since 6 and 2, they are slower and they have difficulties with basic arithmetical concepts such as base 10 system or calculating with decimals or fractions. So as Jan Kaufman wrote, affected children do not grow out of developmental dyscalculia. It is still there. There is still a trace in adults. And in this research, so we can see that there are many different basic number processes where we can find differences between the performance of typical people and people with dyscalculia. And there are even more basic processes that have led to two main hypotheses of a basic number skill deficit in people with dyscalculia. The first hypothesis that was proposed was that there would be a deficit of what is called the approximate magnitude system. There have been many studies with babies or even with animals that show that babies can discriminate between two dots collection if they are sufficiently distant from one another. For instance, you show them 8 dots or 16 dots, they can see the difference. But if you show them 8 dots and then 12 dots, they don't see the difference. For them, it's the same. It has been proposed that underlying disability is a system, the approximate magnitude system. So it's a system that is supposed to code for the magnitude, and in particular the numerical magnitude, and which is very approximate so that only very distant collection can be differentiated. And some people thought that this system would be the basis for understanding the meaning of number words, like when the child, 4 years old, learned the word 4, and we ask them, can you give me 4 apples, for instance? The child has to understand what does it mean, the word 4. And so they thought that learning these words is just a mapping between these words and this approximate magnitude system that was already there when they were babies. And that all math abilities were built on that approximate number magnitude system. And accordingly, they thought if you have a bad approximate magnitude system, then you cannot learn math. So this is the basic deficit that could account for developmental dyscalculia. Another hypothesis that we proposed was that this system, this approximate magnitude system, we know that we are not the only one to use it because there are many animal species who have this system available. But as humans, we are the only one to learn and develop a symbolic number system. The symbolic number system is both number words and Arabic digits, and also Roman symbols and so on. And many developmental studies have shown that actually for the child, even when they know the list, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it takes a very long time for them to understand the meaning of the different words, understand the meaning of 1, understand the meaning of 2, then months after understanding the meaning of 3, and so on. So this research said it's not possible that the meaning of these number words is learned only by mapping these number words onto this approximate number system. These number words, it takes a lot of time to understand them because actually the child has to build a really new system that I would call an exact magnitude representation. So now 4 is not about 4, like here 4 is about 4. Now 4 is exactly 4. If you ask me, please give me 4 apples, I have to give you 4 apples, not 3, not 5. And so the idea is that all math, which is exact math, and if I ask you 3 plus 4, I want you to say 7, not 8, not 6. So all these mathematics are built on that exact number magnitude system. And dyscalculia would be a difficulty in grasping the number sense of symbolic numbers and processing on these numbers. And of course, at first, the precise number system is quite simple, although it's already a challenge for people with dyscalculia. But then this system becomes increasingly complex, like when you have to learn 1/3. What does it mean 1/3? Then you realize that the number are much more complex, like that between 1 and 2 there is an infinity of numbers, and so this exact number representation gets complexified during all your math learning, and every time it's a new challenge. We also know that children with developmental dyscalculia show brain peculiarities. There are brain peculiarities at different levels. The first level is brain structure. So when we analyze the brain structure of children with developmental dyscalculia, some studies have reported less gray matter in the posterior parietal cortex, which is the one here, including the IPS. The IPS is called the intraparietal sulcus, so it's something deep in the parietal cortex. And this region is very important because we know that every time you have to deal with number, it gets activated. So probably this area encodes the sense, the number sense. Also in the prefrontal cortex, in red here, and also in the hippocampal area. So this structure is involved in memory, and this structure is involved in all reasoning skills, I would say, in reasoning skills, in when you have to plan a strategy to solve something, and even though studies have shown brain peculiarities in the brain structure, it is important to remember that to be a dyscalculic means that you have a normal brain with no lesion. And currently, I mean, these specific differences are seen in group studies with very detailed measure and statistical analysis. Currently, you can never give a diagnostic of dyscalculia based on the imagery of the brain of a person. So these are very tiny differences. There are also peculiarities in the brain connectivity, and especially in the connectivity between the parietal cortex and the prefrontal cortex. So these are really the circuits that are involved in doing arithmetic, for instance, or when you have to think and solve math problems. And finally, when studies measure brain activity, they have shown less brain activity in this IPS during the comparison of dot sets or of symbolic comparison, like when the people have to compare two Arabic digits. In other studies, they have shown increased brain activity in this parieto-frontal area, in this all this network, the frontoparietal network, probably because people have to recruit more control processes or working memory to deal with the same task because it's more challenging cognitively for them. And often in studies, we show that while in typical children, the brain activity is modulated, so is influenced by the difficulty of the task proposed, often in studies, we don't see this modulation of activity in the brain activity of the children with dyscalculia. So all these observations, I mean, we don't know what is the cause and what is the consequences. And these are particularities that are associated with dyscalculia, but maybe the difficulties lead to brain particularities, or maybe brain peculiarities leads to the performance. That's currently we don't know. The two possibilities are open. Now, how can we help the people with developmental developmental dyscalculia? A first approach was that maybe we could work on the general cognitive factors. Like I told you, there are many studies showing that they have problems in working memory, and we know that having a good working memory is important for all types of learning, not only math. So some people, including me, we thought maybe we're gonna try to improve that working memory, because then they will have a more proficient system to learn math and also in other domains. There have been several studies like that, and one of them was a study that we did with Nastasia Honoré. We worked with 46 preschoolers, and we randomly assigned them to two groups. One group who benefited from a working memory training. They had 25 sessions in 5 weeks of working memory training, and the other groups received just a control training that did not aim to improve working memory. And after that, we found out that the training worked, because we had significant improvement on 3 memory tasks out of 5, but we had absolutely no impact on any of the numerical tasks that we tested. And similar results were found in another study that we did with another program to improve working memory, but also in other studies made by others. So although it was very interesting and we were appealed by that idea, actually, it is not working. So now many studies show that it is much more efficient to directly train the numerical skills. And I would like to start with one of these programs, a general program that was developed by Holmes and Doker. They worked with children with math learning disabilities that were selected by their teacher, and they were around the age of 8, and they made 3 groups. The first group received the catch-up intervention, so the intervention they developed. There were 348 children in this group who received 2 sessions of 15 minutes per week during 4 months, so it was very extensive. The sessions were delivered by classroom assistant who received only 3 half days of training. And these interventions were based first on diagnostic assessment of the child's ability in each component of numeracy. Then, based on this diagnostic, they identify an appropriate focus for intervention based on the child's specific area of difficulty. And the intervention was done with ongoing monitoring of the child improvement. The match time control group with 50 children receive exactly the same amount of individual intervention, but not using the program. And then there was a group with no intervention. And here in the graph, you can see the gain from the intervention, so the child's improvement. And we can see that there is nearly no improvement in the group who received no intervention. Some improvement for those who received the match time control, the match time intervention, and a much higher gain for those who received the catch-up intervention. So it's really important to have an intervention based on the diagnostic of the child and with an ongoing monitoring. According to Fuchs, who really worked a lot on intervention, there are 6 principles of effective intervention for students with math learning disabilities. The first one is that instruction should be explicit. So there are a lot of studies showing that the children with math learning disabilities in general benefit more from an explicit instruction than from discovery-oriented methods. Second one, the instructional design should minimize the learning challenge. So you have to anticipate and eliminate misunderstanding. You have to give precise explanation, use carefully sequences and integrated instruction so that the achievement gap can be closed as early as possible. So you have to use like a stairs with very small steps and be sure that all the challenges can be met by the child. Third, instruction provide a strong conceptual basis for the procedure that are taught. So you will explain procedure, but it's very important that the child understand the conceptual basis of these procedure. Otherwise, the child can maybe use the procedure, but then if you ask the child 3 weeks after to use the procedure, it's completely forgotten because it is not rooted on a deep understanding of why we can do that. Then use drill and practice, cumulative review, and incorporate motivators to help the children regulate their attention and behavior and to work hard. So it's very important to have a positive attitude to towards the child and really give positive reinforcement so that he gets confident, self-confidence, and is willing to make efforts because he or she can see that it is worthwhile, it is worth it. So to develop a program like that, you really need to have a clear idea of the developmental pathway of the child in each of the numerical domain, like how the child gets to understand the meaning of the number words. There are different steps in that. How the child is able to elaborate the counting list. How the child is able to understand addition and solve a single-digit addition. All these processes have been described in the literature with several steps. So it's important to understand these steps. Also, understand the possible misunderstanding that often developmental dyscalculic children may have and the typical errors that could be observed. And also, you have to know the literature of what works best in research of training or intervention. And this is really the work that we did with Giannis Karagiannakis this last year to really make a review of these developmental processes of the intervention studies, and also to propose really sequence and integrative learning procedure to help in each of the domain of mathematics, to help math coaches in general to guide their instructions. And one of the interventions that we mentioned in this book is the one that was developed by Fuchs and a collaborator to help children with math learning disabilities to be able to realize just simple addition and subtraction with one-digit numbers. They proposed 16 weeks of training with 3 sessions of 25 minutes per week. So it's quite an extensive program just for simple one-digit addition and multiplication. So in the first lesson 1 and 2, they just work on the facts plus 1 minus 1, like 5 plus 1, 5 minus 1. Then they go into the fact of plus 0 minus 0, 3 plus 0, 3 minus 0. Then they make a revision of all what has been learned up to that point. Then they go to the doubles from 0 plus 0 up to 6 plus 6, and the same for subtraction. Then they go with the facts plus 2 minus 2, like for instance 7 plus 2, 7 minus 2. Then they explain the difference between what I just know, like 3 plus 4, oh, I know it's 7, and I don't know. I don't know, and then I have to use a procedure. And they explain in detail the procedure, which is called the counting up procedure. Like, for instance, for addition, for the counting up procedure, you start counting with the bigger number, look, so here 5, and then you count up the smaller number, so 2, on your fingers. So you say, I start with 5, then I count 6, 7, so I've counted 2, and then I have 7. This is the answer, is the last number spoken. So they are very explicit on the way to use your finger and the counting procedure. And then they also use games and systems of rewards so that the child really gets motivated. In all these, they are also a strong conceptual basis. So they use manipulative, they use number lines, really to help the child understand what is going on. In each session, there is review and direct feedback. So they start the lesson with reviewing all what has been learned before and direct feedback on if it's correct or not, and if it's not correct, how can I find the solution? There is always a conceptual and a strategic instruction. So the instructor introduces a new concept or a new strategy or something like that. There is always drill and practice on what has been learned on the lesson. Then cumulative review of what has been learned in the lesson and what has been learned previously. And there is also always motivators like tutors award gold stars following each component of the tutoring session. And when you have 16 stars, then you can have a small prize from a treasure box. So the program is really well developed. And this program, they use it with 15 children with math learning disabilities who were in 3rd grade. So you imagine they are in 3rd grade and they still have problems with this simple addition and subtraction. And they compared those children with 15 children, control children who have the same age, similar IQ, similar sex, and here similar working memory. And of course, before the intervention, but you can see that in terms of accuracy, people with math learning disabilities are performing more weakly than control children. But then after all these sessions, the performance are similar for this specific type of exercises. So this program really helped in an efficient way the children to fill in the gap for this simple addition and subtraction. But what is interesting is that these authors also scan the brain of these children before the intervention and after the intervention. And before the intervention, they showed that children with math learning disabilities had a higher activity in their brain in different areas. Like all the little points that you can see in yellow or orange here means that the children with math learning disabilities had a stronger activity of their brain. And you can see that these are areas that we mentioned before, like the prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex. So really these brain areas that are usually involved in arithmetic. So probably they need more cognitive efforts to do the task. And after the intervention, these children were scanned again. And here, these are the results. And you can see that there is no yellow or orange spot anymore. So the brain activation was completely normalized after the intervention. So these results are very important for me because they show that it's possible to improve children's performance in a specific math process and also to change the brain activation while doing this process. So that's why I was saying that peculiarities that we see in the brain of children with developmental dyscalculia, we don't know whether it's the cause or the consequences. Like here, we can really see that the peculiarities in the brain activity was the consequence of their difficulty to do the task. Also, what is important is to mention that we didn't cure their math learning difficulties. Here, the intervention helped to fill in the gap for some specific processes. But I mean, it's not because you have filled in the gap of this process that these children will not have problems with now calculating with bigger number, solving word problems, or processing decimals, for instance. So often it is important to give a lasting support for these children. They need to have support in the different steps of the learning of mathematics. We mentioned previously that there is math anxiety. Math anxiety can be very important, and in the brain area, we can see that increased activity in the right amygdala, which is a brain spot, and this amygdala is associated with processing emotion, and in particular, the flight or flight responses. So if you have high math anxiety, you have more activity in this amygdala. And also related to that, a decreased activity in the frontoparietal region that support numerical processing. So like if you were having all your cognitive energy into facing the fear and no more energy to reason, to think. And can we intervene on that? And there is a very interesting study made by Supekar in 2015, who showed that math intervention is in a positive atmosphere could act as an exposure therapy. So in that study, they worked with 25 children in 3rd grade, and they constituted 2 subgroups, one with low math anxiety and one with high math anxiety. These 2 groups did not differ in terms of age, working memory, or in performance in small calculations. So they were performing the same in addition. And as you can see in the graph here, of course, those with high math anxiety were having more math anxiety than those with low math anxiety. And these children, those with high math anxiety, received the intervention that I just mentioned before. So the intervention on small addition and small subtraction. And after that intervention, they showed that it led to a decrease in math anxiety, a significant decrease of math anxiety that you can see here. These are the results after the intervention. So this was already a very nice result. Doing math in a very nice way with these children led to a decrease of math anxiety. And the other very significant, interesting result regards the brain activity. Before the intervention, they also find that people with high math anxiety were having a higher activation of the right amygdala. So this brain structure here, you can see that those with high math anxiety had more activation of, these are the activity of that region, than the children with low math anxiety. And they also had more activation here in the intraparietal sulcus, this region where really the number magnitude is represented, and also in the prefrontal region. after the intervention, they found also a normalization of the brain activity. So in terms of the amygdala, there was no more significant difference in the brain activity and nor in the area that really support the number sense. So again, this study is very important because it shows that when you work with children with developmental dyscalculia and you really make a nice environment, you can lead to both improvement in math performance, but you can also lead to decrease of the emotional distress. I wanted also to mention the study of an adult patient that I worked with. This was a 34-year-old woman who was failing primary school, which means in Belgium, after the first grade, grade 1 to grade 6, you receive a first diploma. And she failed that, and she was redirected to special education. We showed that her brain had no peculiarities, so she had no brain damage. She had the normal intelligence, normal capacities of reading, but when we tested her, we find that she had really strong difficulties in both calculation and in transcoding. Transcoding is your ability to read and write numbers. And she also had math anxiety. When she had to write Arabic numbers on dictation, she was making a lot of errors. Like, for instance, 40,003, she would write this. 40,025, she wrote this. 206, and so on. She also had some problems in Arabic number reading, but it was very mild. She was just producing the zero, which is not what we typically do. Like 60,001, she would read it at 60,001. So it was very easy to intervene on this last topic because we just had to tell her that we don't say zero. The first thing we did was to really analyze deeply not only the transcoding, but also, is she able to understand the numbers, Arabic numbers or verbal numbers? Is she able to compare two numbers and say which one is the bigger one? Is it able to understand the base 10? Is she able to produce numbers? Like if we give them, if we present her some bills, like you have 3 bills of 10 and 2 bills of 100, how many do you have? Can you please write this in Arabic numbers, or can you please give me orally the corresponding number words? And then also we tested her understanding of base 10 by a task like a product cost 325 euros. You have only 10 euros bills. How many should you give? And from that, we could really see that she had, of course, problems in transcoding, but also she had problems in producing Arabic numbers and also difficulties in base 10 understanding. So from that, here it's just to show you that the errors she made in number dictation were totally similar to the errors she made when we presented her bills, like 2 bills of 100, 3 bills of 10, and she had to produce the corresponding Arabic numbers. So she really had a difficulty to produce Arabic numbers, and she had a difficulty in understanding the base 10 system. So we provided her with 7 sessions on the aim to work on the base 10 and the positional aspects of the base 10 system. We worked on the base 10 of verbal numbers by exercises like if you want to buy, let's say, 36 suites. How do you do it? With certain material. Let me explain. So first of all, we tried to use the Dean's blocks with her, and she really couldn't understand that. For her, she couldn't see that a bar was 10 cubes and so on. It was really a material that was not suited for her. Then we thought maybe we were going to go to a very basic material that is closer to her daily life. And so we used cards with 1 candies, bags of 10 candies, case of box of 100 candies, which are 10 bags, and so on and so on. And so we worked with that, trying to figure out that if I want to have 36 candies, I can take 36 sweets, or 3 bags and 6 sweets, and draw this representation, then work on the equivalence between different types of representation. So we start with 2-digit numbers, then 3-digit numbers, and then even larger numbers. And then we introduce her with the abacus, with units, decades, hundreds, thousands, and so on, and use similar games with that abacus. And with just 7 sessions on that, knowing that the 3 first sessions we used the Dean's cubes and it didn't work, so with just 4 sessions with the candies, bags of candies, box of candies, and so on, she really performed perfectly well on all these tasks. So she really could understand. It was like an eureka in her mind. She had been struggling with that system for so long. And I mean, she was consulting because she was not able to follow her daughter with her homework anymore. And then after this remediation, she really had like an insight of understanding finally this number system. And we retested her 1 year after, and the progress were stable. So I would say it is never too late. It is never too late. You can always try to do something with someone and help them. But of course, I mean, this intervention was successful, but it does not mean, again, that all her problems dissolved. She also had big problem in calculation, and that also required a lot of working. But, I mean, it's a positive message that I would like to give. We can help. So a few words of conclusion. First, dyscalculia, developmental dyscalculia, is not a rare phenomenon. It is as frequent as dyslexia. It is about 6.5% of the children are affected by that learning disorder. Second, it is still underdiagnosed and understood. Third, there is quite a high comorbidity with dyslexia and to a lesser extent with ADHD. Important to recognize that it's not a problem of motivation or laziness, and that this problem often leads to emotional suffering like lower self-esteem, math anxiety, and as the people will grow adult, it also has a socio-economic impact. Difficulties are not restricted to complex math. Difficulties are already present in very basic number skills, and possibly building the meaning of symbolic numbers could be one of the key causing developmental dyscalculia. There is also an influence of general cognitive factors such as working memory and sensitivity to interference in memory. These learning disabilities are accompanied by brain peculiarities, especially in the frontoparietal areas. Intervention targeting the numerical skills are effective and can also lead not only to change in performance, but also to brain activity. And finally, there need to be based on a clear understanding of the child's developmental pathway in the different numerical processes. So it's very important to be acknowledged of the cognitive processes that are required to build this math learning and how they develop. So our hope is really to improve the life of people with developmental dyscalculia and make them more comfortable in classroom. So I would like really to thank the ADA for organizing this event, and I would like to thank you for listening and for all the attention you will give to people who suffer from math learning difficulties. We need to change the way we consider these people, and each and every one of you is part of that change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marie-Pascale. That was a fabulous overview on obviously a lot of research in a complex area. I think you covered an awful lot in the time that you had, so we're very grateful. Just to confirm for everyone, we have been recording the webinar this evening, so we will be sharing a recording with everyone afterwards. So you'll have that to look back on. One or two people did ask about the slides, Marie-Pascale. Would you be okay to share the slides?
Yeah, I can share the PDF with you.
Okay, perfect. So then once I get the PDF from Marie-Pascale, we can include a copy of that with the recording we'll be sending out. I'm conscious we're a little bit later than we had intended, but do you have a couple of minutes for even just one or two of the questions that have come in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a couple of questions were around, I suppose, diagnostics and essentially, I suppose, how perhaps as diagnosticians do we exclude issues such as poor educational stimulation? Perhaps has the child not had the right intervention? Or another question that has come up from one or two attendees is around other cognitive challenges. So for example, if someone has a working memory deficit, are they equally as dyslexic as someone who has, let's say, that true issue with number sense, poor number sense, or do we need to separate those out?
Thank you. So the first question about the diagnosis, poor education, I mean, when we say poor education, usually it's really people who have missed, like if you are traveling all the time with your parents, moving from one house to another one, then you might have a poor education. Or this is more funny, like I was giving a conference once to teacher, and a teacher came to see me after, and she said, you know, you should come in my class because about 30% of the children are dyscalculic in my class. 30%, I mean, it's too much. It's probably that the way the class is provided is not well suited for the children. So sometimes also I can, if I have some doubts, the parents could say, usually my child was okay in math, but since he has changed teacher, it's more complex. Or since my child has changed from this school to this one, he can not follow the class. These are also indices that I can listen to, and maybe sometimes you can contact the teacher also, and because it can, in our countries, you can really have very big difference from one teacher to another one, both in terms of his ability to provide good math teaching, because unfortunately there are some people who are in the education, but they themselves have difficulties for math. But also there are some schools with very high standard who require a lot And so some children go from one school to the other, and the gap is so big that, of course, they are facing difficulties, but it does not mean that they are dyscalculic. So these are components that you can, of course, we don't have objective measure for that, but by listening to the parents, by maybe contacting the teachers, sometimes also you can maybe give a task collectively to the classroom of that specific child and maybe see the difference between that child and the other ones. Voilà, I would say. But of course, in any types of neurodevelopmental disorder, you don't have a red button on the face. So you have to compose with uncertainties.
Yeah, I suppose it's down to the skill of the diagnostician to make sure that they're considering all of these areas. And I suppose making the best formulation possible from all of the information that they have, including what type of intervention a child may have had and the child's response to that as well.
Yeah.
A number of people asked about your suggestions for everything from screening tests to standardized assessments, you know, that align with the DSM criteria for assessment. I suppose I might ask you to speak a little bit on that, but I know that's tricky because obviously tests are very much standardized in countries and in different languages.
Yes.
So that can be a bit tricky, but
yes.
Your recommendations on tests?
But I would say that there are two types of tests. The first type is like what I call a performance test. It's a test that looks a little bit like the test that a teacher would give at the end of the school year. So it's a lot of different processes that are put all together, and that helps you to see whether the child is the child's achievement in comparison to many other children. This will give you an information according to which this child is at low performance or a normal performance. But it will not help you to build your intervention. To build your intervention, you have to have a battery that is more that is built on the cognitive processes that are involved in the math learning, so that you can distinguish between the child's ability to comprehend numbers, to produce numbers, to deal with arithmetical facts, to solve word problem, to understand the magnitude of numbers, and so on. So you have to have different tasks that tap into different cognitive processes, so that after you can really create the profile of the child with the weakness and the strength in the numerical domain. And ideally, complementary to that, you would also need a cognitive evaluation of the child to see, first of all, what is the IQ of the children, his reasoning abilities, but also his working abilities, his attentional abilities. So these will be also very important information in an idealistic world to help you know more the child that you are with, and try to find very good strategies that will help that child according to his weakness and strengths, both cognitively and numerically, I would say. I myself have developed different kinds of tools like that, but it's it is important to have norms in a specific language, in a specific area. So I mean, it's a little bit useless to provide this information. But in the book that we wrote with Giannis, we mention this book is organized according to the different mechanisms in the numerical domain. Like if you say processing a fraction and decimal numbers, then I have a section also, how can we assess that? What are the tools to assess that? And then if you go to another section like number transcoding, okay, what are the tools that we can use to assess that? And then if in your country you don't have a tool like that, at least you can see the tools that are in the field around, and maybe that you can work on an adaptation. And with Giannis Karagiannakis, we are also building we have built an online test that is very easy to translate, that will probably be used in many different countries as well.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. I know there's great work going on translating that into different languages at the moment. So I think hopefully there will be more useful tools becoming available for people as well. Can I ask you a question? I know obviously you touched in your talk around the importance of, you know, the intervention, and I suppose how a lot of concrete reinforcement is needed for individuals. Beyond the intervention, and as you said, maths is a core subject in every school curriculum across all countries. What kind of accommodations, for example, accommodations and exams, does the research tell us can be somewhat helpful? While obviously, you know, it's hard to completely accommodate for, you know, those deep underlying number sense skills.
That's a question. I mean, we don't have research on that currently, yeah? But and that's a difficult question. But like if I start with the younger ones, there was a debate about can we allow the children to use their fingers, for instance. And I think that it's very important to let the children use their fingers as long as they need to. And one day, probably when they will have stored enough arithmetical facts in their memory, probably they will lose the use of these fingers. They will not need them anymore. Then after they are learning calculations, there is the question of can they use the calculator? Is it possible to use the calculator as an accommodation or not? And I would say it depends. If the aim is to learn the child how to calculate, and if you give them a calculator, they will learn nothing. But if you test their ability to solve a word problem, for instance, so what you are testing is really the ability to read a problem, to see what equation corresponds to that problem, what calculation I have to do to solve that problem, but not calculation per se. So in that case, allowing the use of calculator might be interesting. If you are in higher grades and you have to do equation and so on, I mean, if you still, why not giving a calculator at that time? That's not the aim of the topic. But when you are learning really to solve single addition, single multiplication, and so on, giving a calculator in the exam, it makes no sense. But maybe other tool will be useful. Maybe the child has learned to use the Kussner rods, and why not allowing the child to use these materials? So at each time, there is not a general rule, but what is important is to find out what are the tools that the child needs to be able to do the process, maybe counting on the fingers, maybe using the Kussner rods, maybe using number lines, maybe using blocks and so on. And then after, what are the tools that we can use to help him focusing on a specific mechanism and alleviate his working memory from other things. Like if I do problem solving, I need all my resources to do the problem solving and not to calculate. Or when I do equation, I need all my resources to do the equation and not do the little calculation, because otherwise it's always double task. And for the other people, it's not double task, because for them, calculation is very simple, so it's not leading to a lot of cognitive load.
So extra time then would be...
Yeah, sure, extra time. I mean, it's a general rule. They are slower, like all the other children with learning disabilities, they are slower. It's really something general. So this is not costly, and this is really needed. But there are also other accommodations that are more specific.
As well. Okay. Great. Well, I'm just very conscious of your time and everyone who joined us this evening. I think we'll definitely have to return to this topic, and perhaps maybe this could be the first in several webinars of Dyscalculia that EDA will offer over the coming period. So just to confirm, we will be sending out the recording. Marie-Pascale is kindly sending her slides as well, and apologies to anyone if we didn't get to get through all the questions, but as I say, hopefully we can come back to it again, or you'll have some great reading material and references to explore yourselves, we'll say, from the presentation. So thank you so much, Marie-Pascale. We're really very grateful to you for giving up your time for today, Dyscalculia Day. I hope it's been helpful for everyone, and thank you all.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.